Deciding to go into the priesthood isn't a decision that one takes lightly, as it's more than a career choice. It is a lifelong vocation. But before one can get ordained, they must first be educated at a seminary. So what exactly is a seminary, and what does it entail? I'm your host, Carolyn Morrison, and welcome to Mysteries of the Church. In this episode, we will trace the history of seminaries and explore their role in the Catholic Church. Seminaries are higher education institutions with one main purpose: to prepare men going into the clergy.
The call to priesthood is a response to the call that Jesus really utters when, as we read in the gospel texts, he calls those to himself whom he wishes to send forth to preach the gospel of salvation.
The formation that goes on there is very powerful and very deep. Whole and balanced. You know, that's always been the goal, and that's the goal now.
So you could say that there's a threefold thrust to seminary training. First of all, it's spiritual. Secondly, it's academic. Third, it's pastoral or ministerial.
Often associated with theological colleges or divinity schools, seminaries offer a wide range of study, focusing on areas of theology, philosophy, and spirituality.
You want priests to be well-rounded, good, well-educated, and well-rounded men. They're going to revolve around the teaching of dogmatic theology, moral theology, scripture, church history, canon law. Those would be the primary focuses with regard, the primary focus with regard to the intellectual component. There was always going to be the more practical or pastoral side of it.
Pastoral formation was meant, for example, going out to a parish, helping out in a parish. It meant being involved in teaching adults, adult education, meant working perhaps in a soup kitchen. It meant all of that kind of thing.
The structure of it helps to form the person. It helps them to understand why they're doing this, and really creates an atmosphere where they can grow and appreciate their vocation. And mostly, more than anything, I believe through the formation and through the structure is to walk with Christ and learn to love him and to be like him.
A young man can actually begin his journey into the priesthood by attending either a preparatory high school or Catholic college before heading into the seminary.
If a boy was coming in at the level of high school, after he completed the high school phase, he would then go on to Douglaston Cathedral College. And when he completed that, he would come either here to the Seminary of the Immaculate Conception in Huntington, or he could be sent to the North American College in Rome, and there would be other options in terms of theologates. But here in Huntington, it would be referred to as the Major Seminary or the Theologate. And that term theologate comes from the fact that here, now one studies theology. The focus of one's study in terms of that intellectual pillar is the study of theology.
And the major seminary would be roughly 4 years of training in addition to your college. You would have gotten the college degree, and then you would be trained in all the things, in all the aspects of theology and pastoral ministry and your own spiritual life that you have to know for the priesthood.
You would basically go from 4 years of high school to 4 years of college to 4 years of graduate school. And now we have brought, in a sense, the ecclesiastical structures into conformity with that.
But education is what occupies most of the student's time, preparing him for a religious vocation within the clergy.
In the major seminary, you would have scripture study, church history, all kinds of what we call systematic theology, such as Christology, sacramental theology, foundational theology, fundamental theology. Talks about the foundations of building your theology on, all the God's, how God reveals himself, basically revelation. So I think it's a very well-balanced curriculum that any seminary would offer.
A seminarian is typically considered ready for the priesthood after 6 years of study. But becoming an ordained priest isn't the only path that one has to take, as seminaries offer an exceptional education that can have a profound impact on one's life, no matter what the career. When we come back, we will explore the origins and history of the seminary. Welcome back to Mysteries of the Church. Today, seminaries are mandatory for those preparing to go into the priesthood by providing students a setting for higher learning and spiritual awareness. But centuries ago, seminaries didn't exist. So how did one become a member of the clergy, and how did it evolve into what it is today?
Certainly, seminaries didn't exist at the beginning of Christianity. The apostles were priests, we would say, and they never went to a seminary. Their proximity to Jesus was their seminary, I suppose you could say.
In the early days of the Catholic Church, the training of a priest was similar to that of an apprentice. It was very personal and practical, and was usually limited to learning how to perform the Mass.
They didn't receive a systematic education. They simply saw how the priest did it in let's say, a country village in rural England in the 12th century. Somebody who wanted to be a priest would perhaps have lived in the rectory with the pastor of that place, would have seen what he did, how he did it, and all the rest. And then when the pastor felt that young man was ready, he would have recommended him to the bishop, who would have ordained him.
The passing on of the priesthood was really a one-on-one type of experience. It was the human contact between the bishop and his fellow priests with the young men who were interested or attracted to the service in the church.
The history of the church, from the apostolic age into the earliest, what we call patristic era of the church of the 4th and the 5th century, is a history with regard to priestly formation of those men who were really called to be with the local bishop, to reside with the local bishop, to begin to form themselves spiritually and to form themselves intellectually, usually in the residence of the local bishop.
For centuries after that, people trained to be priests by watching other priests. Oftentimes they were selected to be priests without any training whatsoever.
So it was basically maybe a calling forth by the bishop, or presenting to the bishop, or the bishop going out and pointing out certain people and calling them to that service, and then basically being trained by the bishop and the other priests of that community.
There were Christian schools, such as in the ancient cities of Alexandria and Edessa, but these schools trained bishops and were never considered seminaries. Perhaps the earliest resemblance of an actual seminary is the clergy house established by St. Augustine in the 4th century. This clergy house was the actual home of St. Augustine, who took in priests for communal study and eventually produced 10 bishops who later served areas in Africa.
He becomes very important in terms of creating this kind of a monastic community around the bishop, a community of prayer, a community of study in preparation for going out to serve as priests.
However, the lack of uniformity and a formal education for priests was becoming a challenge for the church. For instance, some were well schooled in the liturgy but couldn't effectively run a church, while others were good at dealing with parishioners but didn't have a deep understanding of Catholic theology.
someone would be determined as ready to serve as a priest when he could at least go through the ritual of the church, that he'd be able to celebrate Mass, that he would be able to celebrate the sacraments, that there would be some form of pastoral presence. That determination, in the end, was made by the local bishop. He would be the one who would have the final say in terms of a man's readiness to be ordained as a priest.
Roughly around the Council of Trent, there were priests ordained just to say Mass, but they weren't allowed to hear confessions, they weren't allowed to give counseling. They were just there to say Mass. It was understood that the Mass was the most important aspect of a priest's ministry, that it was the thing that defined the priesthood, and they believed that it was sufficient to ordain someone just for the purpose of saying Mass. But that certainly is not the way it's done anymore.
When the church realized the importance of a very formal period of academic preparation, as well as interior formation and pastoral service, the church began to respond to that particular need just at about the early part of the 16th century. Pope Paul III established a commission in 1536. The commission established in 1536 during a period of time in which the church was going through crisis, either due to the illiteracy of some clergy or due to the scandals that existed in the life of the church. Paul III determined that a commission would advise him on what would be the best way to have formation for the priesthood. This commission began to meet in 1536, in late 1536, and it met into early 1537. The commission proposed to Paul III the importance of men being formed for the priesthood in terms of some type of their being kept together. They're being kept together in what eventually would be the decree of the Council of Trent in 1563 that would establish the seminary system as we know it.
It wasn't until the 16th century in Trento, Italy, that the Council of Trent established the groundwork for institutions specifically designed to educate those entering the priesthood. These early live-in seminaries were not all that different from monasteries until the Second Vatican Council of the 20th century changed the focus on how a seminary was to operate.
For 500 years, seminaries have been preparing young men for the priesthood in dioceses across the globe. And as the need for priests have changed, so have the seminaries, by offering different areas of study to better serve the church and community. When we come back, we'll see how seminaries got their start right here in the United States.